Huh. Go figure. But we wrapped up Genesis. We're talking tonight about, or we're starting into Exodus. We ended and spoke about Israel, or Jacob, whichever one you prefer to call him, about his final blessings or prophecies, as you would. We learned a lot about that, actually. Did anybody have anything to go over that before we move on? All right, I'm moving on. All right. We then, so they buried Jacob. They took him back to where he was asked to go. And, you know, I know we talked a lot about why Jacob was buried with Leah and not with Sarah. Logan and I looked it up and stuff. I know a bunch of other people did too. But even though he loved Rebecca, or Rachel, even though he loved Rachel truly, when she passed away, it was right after childbirth, and they were traveling and on the road. So they did not have the ability to cremate, what's the word for it? To embalm the body. Whereas when Jacob died, they actually were living in Israel and stuff, and that was a practice that, what did I say? Israel? They were in Egypt, and that is actually a practice, you know, that came from Egypt. So there was, you know, preservation of the body and stuff like that able to be done. So that is why she was buried there, and then he was buried with Leah. I mean, also she was the first wife, so who knows? But anyways, so Jacob was mourned, and in chapter 50 of Genesis, it tells us, and 40 days were fulfilled for him, for so are fulfilled the days of those which are embalmed. And the Egyptians mourned for him 70 days. So Joseph was so high up in Egypt, and the family was so, you know, known and everything else. Even the Egyptians mourned him. And as we move into Exodus, we'll see more how the Egyptians, you know, did not care for his people. But I mean, there was even a point in time here that they mourned him. I mean, that means he was missed. So I think that's important to just note that even the Egyptians mourned for him. When the days of mourning were past, Joseph spoke unto the house of Pharaoh, saying, if now I have found grace in your eyes, I pray you the ears of Pharaoh, saying, my father made me swear, lo, I die in the grave which I have digged for me here in the land of Canaan, there shall bury me. So he's asking Pharaoh to take his father's body back home. And so he does. Of course, Pharaoh says he can. And so he buries his father there where he'd asked to be placed, with Abraham, his father. So they're all together, Abraham, Sarah. So the whole generation is there together. Of course, Joseph's brothers fear him, did to him, but Joseph even tells them, he weeps and he says, fear not, for am I in the place of God? You thought evil against me, but God meant it unto good, and to bring to pass as it is this day, to save much people alive. So he says, now I will nourish you and your little ones. And he comforted them and spake kindly to him. So it's just an example of forgiveness. Everything that his brothers did to him, he was able to forgive them because he could recognize the placement of God in every situation he was in. And without him, you know, even Egypt would have starved. They wouldn't have known that this famine was coming, and there would have been so many people that died. So, you know, Joseph forgave them, and they all lived happily. There we go. Joseph dwelt in Egypt, he and his father's house, and Joseph lived for 110 years. Joseph saw Ephraim's children of the third generation. So Ephraim's his son, and if he sees the third generation, I mean, he's meeting his great grandchildren. And I mean, that is like That's a blessing right there, because rarely do you get to meet your great grandchildren, but to get to meet the great great grandchildren, I mean, that's pretty awesome. It even says the children also of Machir, the son of Manasseh, were brought upon Joseph's knees. So he got to know them. He got to be a part of their lives. So he was blessed. He was really blessed with a big family and grandchildren. So Joseph tells them, you know, when I die, take my bones from here. He wants to go back home. So that is a promise that is made to him. So Joseph died being 110. They embalmed him and he was put in a coffin in Egypt. All right. So does anybody have anything that they want to say about the wrapping up of Genesis? I mean, gosh, that took us a super duper long time, and we're getting ready to move to Exodus.
I would like to say something.
Awesome.
It is a question.
Okay, go for it.
So what did it mean when they put Joseph in a coffin? What is a coffin?
So think of it like a mummy, like Egypt, Logan just said. So they preserve the body by wrapping it up, you know, and with special chemicals and things like that. And then a coffin is like one of those big sarcophagus that it's like a box, and they put the body inside of that and seal it up so that it's sealed and it's protected inside of that.
Okay.
Okay?
Yep, cool.
All right. Someday we'll have to do some Egypt studying, KJ. I suggest that to your mom for history because you'll like it. It's awesome.
You've already done that.
Yeah. I already studied Egyptian stuff in ancient history.
Nice.
And they took a few body parts out of some dead person and put them in jars, which is disgusting.
I am so proud. You remember?
Yeah, because that's the cool part, Mom. And
I'm just so proud right now.
I pretty much only remember the inside.
Yeah, they pretty much pulled everything out so the outer skin would be better preserved and put all the pieces in jars of your internal organs. So, yeah. On another note,
I guess they could have took the lid off the jar and beat on someone's brain.
You better hope you're really dead if you're being mummified by an Egyptian in ancient times.
Yeah.
All right.
No faking death in Egypt in ancient times. Or
Oh, we got it.
Okay. All right. So are we ready to move on to the next chapter in the Bible, KJ? You ready?
Yep.
All right, let's do it. Okay, so Israel's descendants in Egypt. So these are the name of the children of Israel. We've got Reuben, Simon, Levi, Judah, Issachar, Zebulun, Benjamin, Dan, Naphtali, Gad, and Asher. And all the souls that came out of the loins of Jacob were 70 souls, for Joseph was in Egypt already. And Joseph died, and all his brethren, and all that generation. So Joseph died, all his brothers died, and so that full generation has passed away. Okay. And keep in mind, it's been 110 years because that was Joseph's lifespan. So, and the children of Israel were fruitful and increased abundantly and multiplied and waxed exceedingly mighty, and the land was filled with them. So there is a new king in Egypt, and now there arose a new king, which knew not Joseph. And before we get started on this, my dad and my sister and I, we were talking about this and this time span of how long has passed. So it's probably, it's definitely a couple hundred years have passed because, of course, Joseph lived for 110. So for their so what we were discussing was in in the real realm of things, it really did not take that long for an entire civilization to forget Joseph and the miracles that he did. And what is interesting about that is Jesus passed away, right?
Yeah.
And look at how our entire civilization is beginning to forget all the miracles that he did. Joseph. Go ahead, KJ.
Are forgetting about stuff Jesus did because of a bunch of crazy, stupid theories.
Well, I'm gonna you push the mute button or you let me know. So Jesus did all these miracles. People talked about him and shared the story about him, and we've progressed hundreds of years. But if we look at the world today, we are starting to be in that time of prejudice, anger, hatred, so many things that are reflected, just like when Egypt forgot about Joseph. The king.
We every so every day, every minute, every second is actually makes it closer to Revelation. And Revelation, well, there's going to be a lot of bad stuff going on before the world actually ends.
Right. So just like that, though, and we're moving into this time in Egypt when there's a lot of anger and there's a lot of meanness. There arose a new king over Egypt, which knew not Joseph. And he said unto his people, behold, the people of the children of Israel are more and mightier than we. Come on, let us deal wisely with them, lest they multiply and it come to pass, where they falleth out in any way, they join also unto our enemies and fight against us. And so get them up out of the land. So he was afraid. And that's the one thing to remember, fear. He was afraid that the Israelites were going to be more powerful. They would join with his enemies and they could overtake him. Now, what drives all that anger and meanness nowadays in our country and in our world? Fear. And, it's that one thing that the devil uses with all of us to have us make bad choices. And I mean, that's just a real thing. It is. And we always need to remember to not be afraid and to let God have control of the situation.
Hey, I'd like to say something.
Yeah, go for it.
It is entirely possible, because Joseph was called by an Egyptian name by Pharaoh, that the story of the great ruler that saved Egypt from dying of famine was probably still a thing, but they probably buried his true history. And what we see today is people literally changing the history. They're literally changing the word of God to fit their needs.
Exactly.
They no longer tell the true word of God. They adapt it. And you see advertised on the television, if you got cable, this whatever different story that has a different version of Jesus, but it's not the truth. It's completely false. But those things cast doubt and cause the people to forget who Jesus really is, because they're not looking in the Bible. I just wanted to point that out because I think it's important.
Absolutely. No, it is important. And, we had just kind of got into that conversation, wow, it's a similar thing. How little time has to pass before people forget what's important, so we had got into that conversation and I found that super interesting. And so I wanted to make sure I share that with you. And thank you, Christy. That's definitely it. Like, people change the story and they're not supposed to. So the king set over them taskmasters to afflict them with their burdens. And they built for Pharaoh treasure cities, Pithom and Ramses. But the more they affected him, the more they multiplied and grew. And they were grieved because of the children of Israel. And the Egyptians made the children of Israel to serve with rigor And they made their lives bitter with hard bondage in mortar and in brick, and in all manner of service in the field, with all service wherein they made them serve. So I would, even more time is passing. Because we've got this one king, and he brings back up the hatred of the Israelites. He feeds that fear, he feeds that anger. And so we've got more time and more time that's passing. So that's just more and more kids, and that's more generations, and more of the older generation passing off. So it's more forgetting and a change of the times. The king of Egypt spake to the Hebrew midwives, of which the name of one of them was Shiphrah, and the name of the other Puah. And he said, when do the office of the midwife to the Hebrew women, and see them upon the stools. If it be a son, then you shall kill him. But if it be a daughter, then she shall live. So the king appoints the midwives with the job of killing all the baby boys, because again, he's trying to stop the production of more Israelites.
Hey, Miss Becky.
Yes, sir.
So that is similar to something that happens later in the Bible in Matthew when Jesus is born. So Herod, that's the king at that time, right? Mm-hmm. So he orders all of the youngest babies to be killed. Baby boys. Killed.
Isn't that crazy?
And that relates to something. It's both those two moments in time, both relate to each other because they are very similar. It is very similar.
You're right. They are.
It is something very interesting to think about.
Yep.
How two moments in time could be very similar.
Yep. Good point. Good point. The Pharaoh, does, after he tells the midwives to kill the baby boys, the midwives are like, we don't know when they're giving birth, because the Hebrew women are so lively, they call it, so strong. They go off and have a baby on their own, and then they're back to work. I mean, and kudos to those women. So therefore they don't know when they have a baby, because they keep it secret. So I'm sure, they're all hiding their babies and, like I said, keeping it secret. Therefore God dealt well with the midwives, and the people multiplied and waxed very mightily. And it came to pass, because the midwives feared God, that he made them houses. So God keeps on blessing them. He keeps on blessing them and blessing them, and they keep on multiplying. Pharaoh charged all his people, saying, every son that is born you should cast into the river, and every daughter you shall save alive. So there was a man of the house of Levi, and took to wife a daughter of Levi, and the woman conceived and bare a son. And when she saw him that he was a goodly child, she hid him for 3 months. And when she could hide him no longer, she took him an ark of bulrushes, and dabbed it with slime and with pitch, and put the child therein, and she laid it in the flags by the river's brink. And his sister stood afar to see what would be done with him. So this baby, his mom keeps him for 3 months and hides him. And I can only imagine how hard it would be to hide a baby for 3 months. Huh, Haley? Bet you couldn't keep that one quiet for 3 months. But yeah,
no one can keep me quiet for 3 months.
I know. For 3 months.
Amen.
I was making full sentences at an early age.
Let's move on.
Okay. So the daughter of Pharaoh came down to wash herself at the river. So the princess comes down to the river. She walks along the river, and then she sees the little boat among the flags, the rushes, and she sends her maid to fetch it. And when she opens it, she saw the child, and behold, the baby wept. And she had compassion and said, "This is one of the Hebrew children." And then said his sister to Pharaoh's daughter, "Should I go and call a nurse of the Hebrew women so that she should come and nurse the child for you?" So I skipped a little paragraph. My bad. I got lost in my things. So the sister of the baby is watching, and she pops up all of a sudden, and she's like, "Oh, that's a little baby. Do you want me to go to the nurse and we'll get somebody to feed him? He's crying." Well, I really like to think in this moment that God really affected the princess's heart, because I mean, we women have a soft heart anyways, but when it comes to children, that like does it for us. And for her to be willing to go against her whole like royal family household to take this baby in, I mean, God really had to strike that in her heart. So I always think of that and how she must have just been such a compassionate woman for him to be able to give this baby to her.
Hey,
All right.
Miss Becky. Hey, Miss Becky.
Right here.
You know how later, Moses leaves Egypt and then later comes back, and then the Pharaoh is, well, not willing to let the Israelites go. Well, it's possible that the Pharaoh that didn't want to let the Israelites go could have been Pharaoh's daughter, the one that found Moses.
There's a female pharaoh called Hatshepsut. I think that's how you say it. I'm probably terribly butchering it. But I kind of think she might have been who Moses faced, and that she might have raised him. She was very hated. Most of her records were stricken from history by the Egyptians after whatever happened to her.
Miss Becky.
Also, that's when the people that were making mud bricks kind of disappeared from Egypt. So
Is that
I-
your PC?
Well, all right. So the baby's sister, the Pharaoh's daughter said, "Go," and the maid went and called the child's mother. And the Pharaoh's daughter said unto her, "Take this child away and nurse it for me, and I'll even pay you." And the woman took the child and nursed it. So as the child grew, she brought him to the Pharaoh's daughter, and he became her son. And she called his name Moses. And she called him that because she drew him out of the water. And it came to pass in those days when Moses was grown, and he went out unto his brethren and looked onto the burden, he spied an Egyptian smiting a Hebrew. So before we move on, I think it's really definitely interesting how God even worked Moses's mom back into his life, his birth mother, gave him the mother, of the princess of the palace, and, also allows him to grow up with wealth, food, shelter, everything he needs to have a healthy life, but he's still separated. He still knows who he is, where he comes from. And I'm sure this comes from his natural mother being able to be a part of his life and educate him on who he is and where he comes from. Does anybody have anything to say that like before we move on to Moses moving and seeing and commenting and taking action against how the Israelites are being treated?
You were tricking me.
isn't it interesting that he was in a position to succeed either way? He would have either become king
Yeah.
and freed them. But he also was given a great education because of where he was.
Yeah, definitely.
And either way, the Israelites would have been let free unless something happened to Moses before he became the age of being king. That
Yeah.
is.
Okay. We only have a few minutes. We probably have about 5. Does anybody want to like talk about anything in today's, like, Logan, did you get anything?
It's not garlic bread.
You're joining us today for the first time. What do you think? Did you get anything out of today? Like, did anything like jump out at you or take your interest?
It's not mac and cheese.
Oh, her volume's not working. There it is.
It's not a fried fry.
Oh shoot. Okay. I think it was like it's definitely a story that I've like grown up hearing, but like there's more details that I've like never heard before. Cause like I never knew Moses like grew up in like with the princess and stuff like that. So I think it was interesting.
It definitely is. I just think it's really super neat, you know, how God again is directing footsteps of everybody's life, keeping them safe, and giving so much. Dad, you got anything to add?
Not really. I think at about this time that this is going to be happening is about 40 years after Moses's birth. It's about 40 years between his birth and the time he heads out into the desert because he killed the Egyptian, and then about another 40 years before he returns to lead out the Israelites. So it's not like just a few weeks. It's like 80 years. He's 80 years old when he comes back. And a lot probably happened during that time in Egypt. You know, there may have been changes of pharaohs and all kinds of things. So yeah, there's a big time gap there.
Yeah, definitely. There definitely is. And I mean, just to, you know, in this chapter, we know that Moses sees a Hebrew being beaten, and he jumps in and he just gets so angry that this man is being treated this way that he kills the Egyptian and the guard. And what's he do? He tries to hide it, because what do we do every time we do something wrong that we know we just shouldn't have done? Our first instinct is to hide it, but the truth's always going to come out. Always does. When he went out the second day after he kills this Egyptian, he finds 2 men that are Hebrews, and they're fighting, and he says to them, you know, why are you fighting? And who made thee a prince and a judge over us? And tendest out to kill me, and kills just like the Egyptian. So the Hebrew people say, oh, you're going to kill us just like you killed that guard? You know, so Moses freaks out because he knows everybody knows that he killed the guard. So he takes off and he is going to run away from Pharaoh. And like my dad said, that this is around the time frame he's about 40, I think is what you said, Dad. And so he goes into the wilderness, runs away into the desert, and then that's where we'll pick up next week. So if anybody thinks of anything or comes across anything when you're reading about the story that you think is interesting, or like a fun fact, anything like that, let us know next week, okay?
Okay.
All right.
Does anybody have anything they want to add before we get cut off?
He was 80 years old and told to lead all these people. I feel so sorry for this guy.
Right?
Man, when I'm 80, I want to be like retired in the sun, in a rocking chair with my blanket and my TV or a book.
Oh, like know, like him being raised in the palace was part of leadership training because, you know, when you're raised in a palace, you know, the son of a princess, you're going to watch people being judged. You're going to see how things are done. You're going to see how leadership works. You're just going to notice that from afar, and you're going to pick up traits. You know, you're going to start to notice on how this job is done. So I think his placement in the palace is another footstep for God. I think there's a reason for that placement.
I think also it teaches us to have compassion on our pastors because they are sent to lead an entire congregation, and that's like a headache. I wouldn't want to do that. All those fussing people all the time. I'm not cut out for that.
Me either, girl, me either. All right, ladies and gentlemen, the timer's going to ding here soon and we'll be cut off. So thanks again, everybody, for joining tonight. Read ahead.
Thank you,
and
Becky.
take some notes.
Thank you. Very good.
All right, so we shall continue until next week.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Love you guys. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.